This is Metal Mike, and in this episode we talk with legendary producer Beau Hill. Hear inside stories and Beau's thoughts on bands he's produced like Winger, Warrant, Ratt, Twisted Sister, and more. We hear how he cracked the whip as a producer, and I make him create a supergroup based on rockers he's produced, and his answer may shock you. If you're checking this out on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and consider being a supporter through Anchor. Details are in the description below. Feel free to email me anytime your comments at 80'sglammetal1@gmail.com, and I'll keep you in the loop of what's coming next on the channel. It's a cool one with Beau. Check it out. Well, Beau, welcome to the 80's Glam Metalcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So, what have you been up to? You been producing or doing anything like that in recent times?
Well, I had spent the last several years primarily mixing and mastering. It's just the whole production side of the business obviously changed
Right.
considerably. You know, with the budget shrinking and everything else, I still wanted to work and wanted to be involved. And I love mixing, so this was the alternative.
What kind of music? Any music at this point that you'll work on?
I do stuff from bands around the world that I have never even met.
Wow.
They go to my website and they reach out to me and they say, hey, you know, will you mix these songs? And then we work out the details and off we go.
Awesome. Do you get a lot of people who try to like emulate that 80s sound that want to hire you, or like I said, or is it just all different kinds of music?
Well, I think the people that reach out to me are obviously people that are familiar with my work. Mm-hmm. And I don't really get people saying, hey, we want to turn back the hands of time and make an 80s sounding record. They want to have their little piece of the creativity presented in the best light possible. And, you know, after selling a little over 65 million records, there's a lot of people out there in the world that are familiar with my work, so they just reach out.
Definitely. I want to say it was maybe a year or two ago you remastered or remixed Kicks, right? Blow My Fuse.
I did both of them.
Mm-hmm.
I did Midnight Dynamite, and I just finished, well, I didn't just finish. A few months ago, I finished Blow My Fuse.
Nice. What's it like when you go back to those albums? Because I know you produced the original recording for Midnight Dynamite, but what's it like when you go back?
Right.
Do you feel like you've got better tools to do something different with it, or what do you think?
You know, that's a really great question that you ask. I wasn't really sure how I was going to feel about it, but I'm so glad that we did it. Because those records were done 30 years ago, and I never thought in a million years that I would be able to review work that I thought was pretty good back then. And, you know, with no false modesty, there were a few surprises when I dug into the masters, and I went, oh, man, that's okay. I don't remember how I did it, but I was really happy with the result. And then about 30 seconds later, I open up another track that has got the worst sounding whatever that's ever been recorded. So, you know, it was quite an unexpected journey. I think that's the part of it that I liked the best.
Yeah.
And the way that they did it, the company that does this stuff, they sent over copies of everything. The notes that I took, mix notes, outboard equipment settings, console settings, everything. So it was really like I was on an archaeological dig. and you know, and I was able to kind of listen back and go, so I guess this type of approach was really important to me back then. And the guys in Kicks were so cool about it. I mean, it was Beau, do your thing. Whatever you want to do, just do it. And it was great. I mean, I wish I had the opportunity to do that with like every record I ever did.
With the Kicks, you know, because that was pretty successful, maybe you will be able to go back and revisit some of these other albums. That would be
a pleasure beyond. I can't even tell you.
So the first big album that you produced was Out of the Cellar, correct?
Well, that was the first one that sold anything. So I guess for all intents and purposes, that's the record that really put me on the map.
Right. And I think you just said it all right there. So when this album blows up, I mean, everybody and their brother wants to work with you after this, right? It had to have been amazing.
Oh yeah, I had a lot of work on the table.
Out of the Cellar, to me, when I listen to it today, it still sounds great. I mean, for this to be one of your early works, you know, the one that really broke through, I mean, it still sounds great. I think, and it's the material as well. I mean, the sound is great, but also the material. It's just like, you know, this is like Ratt's greatest hits, but it's like their first full-length album. It's just a really great album.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. It's funny when you think about it. Artists will spend their entire lives writing that first album,
right?
And then every record after that, they have to write it, conceive it, record it, and get it done, you know, in a year.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's funny you bring up an interesting point, because if you look at a band, let's just say, for example, Motley Crue, they didn't come out of the gate huge, but they kept building up every album, getting bigger and bigger. And then you can look at albums like Ratt, Out of the Cellar, or Metal Health by Quiet Riot. I know that Stay Hungry wasn't Twisted Sisters first, but it was their biggest. It's like you get these albums that are so big, and it's really hard to, I think, for the band to really follow them up. Would you agree with that?
Yes, in certain instances, I would. And I think, now this is me with my Out Island Psychology 101 hat on.
Okay.
But I think the virtually instantaneous rags to riches story that a lot of groups had, I think some of the guys struggled with that, you know, just like Ratt in particular, because they were quite destitute at the time they got signed. And so to just knock one out of the park to that degree, you know, it kind of can screw with your head sometimes.
Mm-hmm. You produced, obviously, a few after that one. What do you think of the albums of Ratt that follow Out of the Cellar? Is there ones that stand out in your mind, or what are your thoughts on them?
Well, I really loved Invasion of Your Privacy. I thought that was great.
Yep.
And then I had a couple of real special songs, to me anyway, on Reach for the Sky. Mm-hmm. Dancing Undercover, to me, was my least favorite Ratt record.
That's funny. That's my least favorite one too.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, the material was okay. You know, I don't think, in all candor, I don't think that we were, you know, breaking any new barriers at that point in time, either sonically or musically. You know, we were just trying to keep the party going, so to speak.
Right.
And also, you know, you have to feed the beast. So when there becomes an appetite for a particular band or a particular sound or what have you, you have to continue to produce product to keep people interested.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you mentioned Reach for the Sky, because I've always really liked that album, and I know it's not really looked at by people as one of the best. Some people don't like that album, but I really do. I think the songs are really good on it. And with that album in particular, you weren't the producer to begin with, but then you became the producer, you know, at the end of the project. What was the story with all that?
Well, no, you see, and I'm not speaking out of school at all with this, but the guys from Ratt never really wanted me to produce them, and certainly not their debut album. And I don't blame them one bit, because they didn't know who in the hell I was from Adam.
Sure.
And the funny thing that kept happening was, after every record, no matter how successful it was, they kept firing me after every record, and they would do it in a really kind of a public way, like somebody would do an interview in Billboard, and then my lawyer would call me and he'd say, "Hey, did you see Billboard this week?" I went, "No." He said, "Okay, well go to page whatever it was, page 12. I said, "Okay, well, so what's on page 12? And he said, "You just got fired by Ratt." Oh, okay. But it happened after every record, which was really, it got to be funny actually after a while. And And then Doug Morris at Atlantic, the president of Atlantic, would pick up the phone, call the band manager, Marshall Burrell, and say, "Are you out of your fucking mind?"
Right. This is working. We got to keep it going.
Yeah, and so it just became kind of a thing. So, and then we would patch things up and move forward and things like that. But initially, I was not their pick. I believe they wanted Tom Allen to do it.
Okay.
And so Atlantic kind of forced me on them. Well, not kind of, they did. I mean, directly. So when the Mike Stone thing happened, well, I didn't really think too much about it because I didn't have a particularly good experience on dancing.
Sure.
And so it was kind of mutual at that point. I'm like, guys, it's time to go do something else. And everybody agreed, and so they were off doing something else. And so, and I talked to Doug, and I said, I think it's ready for somebody else to have a go at this. And everybody agreed, and they liked Mike Stone, and so they came in, cut the tracks, and then about, I don't know, they just finished basic tracks, and they'd gotten the first vocal draft on it, and they sent it to Doug, and I got a phone call from his office, and it was, he got on the phone, and he said, "I need a big favor." And I went, "Doug, of course, whatever you want, don't worry about it." And he said, "Okay, this is a big favor. I want you to go and fix this Ratt record." And I was like, "What?" And his direct quote was, I said, "Well, what's wrong with it?" And he said, "They sound like the worst Holiday Inn band I've ever heard in my life."
Oh, boy.
And I was just like, "No, that's no way." But anyway, that was his opinion. Mm-hmm. And I was not about to say no to him because, he gave me my start.
Right.
And so I said, "Absolutely, I'll do my very best." And I forget what project I was working on, but anyway, I stopped everything in its tracks and went and fixed Reach for the Sky.
Wow. Another album that you did that maybe isn't one of the biggest sellers out of your catalog is Love Is for Suckers by Twisted Sister. And the story's been told a million times that this was supposed to be a Dee Snider solo album. And of course, just like the label wants you to be with Ratt, to help them out because it's a winning combination. Maybe Dee needs that Twisted Sister name to push this thing. So it ends up becoming a Twisted Sister album. I guess the question that I've always had was, did the guys, the band, the original guys in Twisted Sister, did they even play a lick at all on this album? Because I see Kip Winger's name, Reb Beach, Ronnie Latacro. Did the guys at Twisted Sister play anything on Love Is for Suckers?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that, and I want to say yes, but I don't remember who, and I don't remember what they played on, because Kip and Reb played a huge role on that record, and gosh, but I want to say yes that the Twisted guys did play on it. I think maybe they played the basic tracks, and then we were having there were some issues, and so I brought in Reb to play the solos for sure.
Okay.
And I think, and Kip came in and fixed some bass stuff for us. Mm-hmm. But it was an all hands on deck project, and we just wanted to make sure that it sounded the best that it possibly could. And and Dee and I talked about it, and the label talked about it. And so from the purist perspective of having only the Twisted Sister people play on it, everybody said, "Beau, just make it a great record. We don't really care who you use or who you don't use." Mm-hmm. And so I did.
I love Ronnie Latacro from TNT. What did he do? I know his name's on there. Did he just help out with some arrangements, or did he play anything on there?
I actually don't remember, but either of those two possibilities could have happened. Mm-hmm. I mean, he could have been a co-writer with Dee, and then Dee said, "Hey, Beau, let's let him do the solo on on his song. And then if that's what Dee wanted, that's what we did.
Yeah. The song Hot Love is a great song, and I always wonder if this song could have been huge if it was done by Poison or Motley Crue, but maybe just wasn't the right sound for Twisted Sister.
Well, to be honest with you, I think the Twisted Sister mystique and everything was kind of winding down at that point.
Oh, big time, yeah.
Where everybody had been Twisted Sister to death.
Yep.
I don't think that there was a huge appetite for it, certainly within MTV and mainstream radio. I think everybody was like, okay, we've been there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another one of those ones where, Stay Hungry, so big, so huge. What a stellar album, and then it just kind of digresses, after that album, and never can get back to it,
Yeah, that's the goose that laid the golden egg, so to speak, and trying to reproduce that is really, really tough. I mean, from a writing perspective, and I mean, Dee is one of those performers that he doesn't leave anything out. I mean, he's on 110% all the way. And I just don't know if he could have ever figured out a way to get any better. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. He's pretty amazing when it comes to melodies. When I think of different songs that he's done, he writes really cool melodies. They're almost like they could be, I don't know, if they were instrumental songs, they could be like classical music or something, but they're really catchy rhythmic melodies that he writes.
Well, in my opinion, Dee is probably one of the most underrated vocalists of that whole era and that whole genre, because this guy is a brilliant singer.
Yep, for sure. When you look at the bands that you've worked with, I mean, obviously it was the 80s and all this excess and everybody's partying. Who was the most screwed up band, like on drugs and alcohol in the studio? Or did people actually go and had it together in the studio, or did they come in wasted?
Well, that's another great question, and I'll give you my general answer. I always felt like I had a fiduciary obligation to all the groups that I worked with to be, responsible with the budget. And you can't be responsible with the budget if you've got, a bunch of drunk guys vomiting on the studio floor.
Correct.
And so the way that we kind of did it was, I don't do very well late at night. So we ran our sessions during the day, like normal people. And then I tried to wrap by normally, say, 7 o'clock, which gave everybody plenty of time. You could go out, have some beers, get wasted, do whatever you want to do, but you got to show up tomorrow, 9 o'clock in the morning. And then I gave everybody an hour before we started recording, to have coffee, call your girlfriend, read the paper, whatever it is you want to do.
Yep.
But at 10 o'clock, we're going to make it red and start work. And so keeping that schedule, if you will, which I must admit was very unpopular with most of the bands that I ever worked with, because they thought it was the other way around. They sleep all day, come in and party in the studio at night and things like that. And I just said, I can't do it. I don't function very well like that. And, but it was tremendously unpopular.
I bet.
I think with just about everybody.
Yeah, I'm sure. When you talk about, so you kind of had to be a dictator with time schedule. How about with like songs? I mean, I see there's certain songs you have credits on. There's certain songs that you've played keyboards on. So, I mean, were there songs that somebody'd bring in and you had to be the bad guy and say, like, this song sucks? I mean, this had to happen.
Yeah, and that was a real source of conflict with the Ratt guys in particular. Because everybody in Ratt thought that they were a better writer than everybody else in Ratt, and that wasn't necessarily the case. And so I would collect all the demos in whatever forms they were, and then I was the bad guy that had to say, okay, we're going to do this, and this, and then as a backup, we'll do these 3 songs. And invariably, I made somebody very, very angry. So I always had somebody from Ratt pissed off at me 24/7. Different people at different times, but somebody was always mad at me. No, I mean that was part of my job, was to, dispassionately try to objectively pick the songs that I thought we had the best chance of at radio and MTV and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And oftentimes, I was at odds with the guys in the band, but that was part of my job.
You mentioned Dee Snider as somebody that you think is kind of a one of the best vocalists and maybe underrated as a vocalist. Two that stand out in my mind, and this is total package, is Kip Winger and Jani Lane. I look at the voices of these guys. I don't think they get the credit, all that. Maybe now it's coming out more, but especially once the 90s hit and stuff. I don't know if these guys really got the credit of the kind of caliber of songs they can write, the vocals that they do. Talk about these two a little bit.
Well, as I have mentioned many times, Kip Winger is probably one of the most talented people that I ever worked with. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. I mean, he brings it. He's got a great voice. He's a fine writer and a good performer.
Oh yeah.
And Jani was just an amazing guy. Mm-hmm. And he and I got along really, really well. He was really easy to work with. He was a lot of fun, and he brought 110% every single time. And I always used to tease him, and I said, if you weren't a rock star, you would have been a great Baptist preacher. because his heart's really into it. So
that's awesome. So you did 2 albums in a row for each of these guys. Out of those albums, which ones do you like better? Do you like the Winger debut better, or their second one? And same thing with Warrant. Which out of those 2 albums from each of them, which one do you like the best?
I like the second one with both bands best.
Oh wow! Okay, cool.
And I think the thing is that I think I did a better job on the second records with both these guys.
Okay.
Mainly because since Round and Round came out, I was in studio 24/7, and so. The more time you spend in there, the more time you get to experiment, the more time you get to say, okay, that really sucked. Don't ever do that again. And you bring all that experience with you into every subsequent record that you make. And so I think I was getting better. Mm-hmm. And so when I listened to those records, I know what my contribution was primarily what I would do would be mainly rearrange material. I think that my arrangement skills were getting better and better and better on those 2 particular records. Mm-hmm. And those guys, we had been working together for a long time. I mean, as you mentioned, Kip and Reb, they were like my studio musicians. Mm-hmm. So they played on all kinds of records before we ever put Winger together. And the more we work together, the better fit it gets to be, until it's not. But it is.
In the Heart of the Young is an interesting one because there's a lot of depth on that album, like Rainbow and the Rose and The Day We'll Never See. Those are not your stereotypical, LA hairband, songs, although there's some of that typical stuff on that album. I think the album starts off kind of that way, but it definitely goes into some pretty deep stuff, interesting stuff.
Yeah. And that was the Kip and Reb team. Mm-hmm. They really, really gelled. That's really the only thing that I can say is that they really gelled. And also Paul Taylor, because don't forget Paul Taylor brought in Miles Away, which I thought was a brilliant song.
Great song.
And so we just had some super talented people in that band, and which certainly made my life easier from a production point of view.
Mm-hmm. Beau, who are some people that you almost worked with, like big 80s rock bands, but for whatever reason it fell through?
Well, 2 that come to mind. One is Ozzy.
Ooh.
And the other one is AC/DC.
Those would have been great.
Those would have been great. Now, I have to take the blame for Ozzy, and this would have been the No More Tears album.
Okay. Wow. All right.
But I never became an Ozzy fan until the whole movement was over. And when he did No More Tears, when No More Tears came out, and I heard it on the radio, I just went, my God, was that the stupidest decision that I've ever made? And the AC/DC one was I was on a short list, and then somebody in the European press wrote something either about me or about them. Anyway, somebody from the European press got their political snoot into that project, and I didn't get it because of that, which was really, really, really pissed me off. So anyway, those were two right off the bat that were disappointing, and Europe almost turned out the exact same way, but lucky for me, it didn't.
Okay, so what, Prisoners in Paradise?
Right.
That's an incredible album, and I think I've heard the story from the band that Bob Rock was supposed to produce it, and then he didn't, and then they had their backs against the wall, and luckily you were available to do it. That's a great album, and I think, once again, it's probably just poorly timed because of the trends in music, but I love that album.
I do too, and yeah, it was. I flew to San Francisco to sit in on a rehearsal, and the rehearsal was great. I loved the band. I loved their new music, loved Joey's voice, and I was getting ready to leave, and I said, well, I really hope we get an opportunity to work together, because their manager, Herbie Herberts, wanted me to do it. Yep. And Joey came up to me right as I was leaving. He was as nice as he could be. He said, Beau, really, thank you very much for coming up to hear us, but you're not going to do this record. And I went, oh, okay. Do you mind telling me who? They said, yeah, Bob Rock's going to do it. And we're going to wait for him because he's in the middle of Metallica or whatever he was doing. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, listen, Bob's a friend of mine. Actually, Bob was the guy that engineered my last album as an artist, believe it or not.
No kidding.
and I said, Bob's great. You guys will make a great record. Best of luck. And, I walked out and I went, oh, shucks. It was probably 3 weeks later that I got the call from Herbie, and he said, you want to do it? And I went, yeah, let's go. So that's how that happened. And that had to be my most fun, or at least my top 2 or 3 records, just as far as just the complete off-the-chart hilarity of everything. So think about it. You got 5 guys from Sweden with a Texan. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right?
Oh, right. Now, what about bands that you just are... So you mentioned 2 that could have happened, but you just didn't happen with AC/DC and Ozzy. But who are some that you just wish you could have produced? I mean, did you ever have a yearning to do Motley Crue or any of these guys? Or who did you want to produce?
No.
No?
The 2 artists that I would have given my right arm to work with was Sting and Peter Gabriel.
Wow, so not even 80s rock type stuff. Wow, interesting. Yeah.
Those are the 2 that I would have done anything to work with them.
Now I got a real interesting one for you. Let's see if you can do this one. Okay, create a super band based on all the people that you've worked with. So an 80s rock super band out of artists you've produced, different, singer, guitar player, bass player, drummer from each band. Who would be your super group that you'd create?
Wow. Okay. Well, without dodging your question, I think the strongest players at every position is in winger.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, listen, and I have to qualify this because I've worked with some of the greatest guitar players in the world, mm-hmm. as well as some of the greatest drummers in the world. But as far as, if I had to reach into my bag of tricks, is Mike Slamer is as good as Red Beach. Mm-hmm. And Warren DeMartini is good in a different way. And then vocally, it would definitely be, Kip would be at the top of my list.
Wow. Yeah.
And, and then you got groups like Kix, which are completely different, but as a unit, I wouldn't replace any of those guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that unit really worked.
Exactly.
But as far as just sheer musical brain power, I would have to say that it would be all the guys from Winger.
Wow. I didn't see that coming, Beau. That's pretty cool. I can't dispute it. I agree with you. I mean, they're super, super talented guys. So, I mean, that's a good answer.
Yeah, I mean, you got people like Rod, and he's a percussion professor.
Right.
So these guys really know music theoretically, and as well as the practical aspects of being in a band. So yeah.
One thing, this will be the last thing I'll ask you about it, and I noticed this as a listener, and I know there's a couple probably reasons why this happens, but if you listen to the sound quality of albums, I want to say we're really peaking about 1990, 1991, about when this whole thing is about to end. But what was coming in that was making things sound so better? Was the technology just getting better? Because, like you said, if you Cherry Pie and Prisoners in Paradise, a lot of these albums sonically they're the best sounding albums of this genre, in my opinion. Things were really peaking. But what was it? What made this stuff sound so much better at this point?
I would have to say yes. It was certainly part of the technology. We were dipping our toe into the digital universe as far as multi-track recorders went, and Sony had a beautiful machine out called a 3348, which gave you 48 tracks, and it also had a stereo sampling aspect. So it made making records really consistently a lot easier. So, for example, we would cut basic tracks on analog because everybody liked the nice warmth of it, and then we'd put those tapes away, and we would not use them again until mixing, and we transfer everything into the Sony digital, and we do the overdubs, the vocals, the solos, all the stuff that keeps running the tape back and forth across the heads, which wears them out. And then we wouldn't put them on again until it was time to mix. So there was that going on. The automation within the Neves and the SSLs of the world was getting really good. So with each iteration of technology, it just opened up the playbook creatively, because there weren't so many physical limitations as there were, even 5 years earlier. So if you wanted to try something crazy, you could, if you could think of it, you could probably figure out a way to make it happen.
You mentioned the word grunge. Grunge comes up a lot on this podcast. The year 1991, the year of reckoning, when everything kind of changed. How did that affect you? I mean, you obviously you produced the bands that are no longer in. Was it hard for you to get producing gigs once the grunge thing hit?
Well, what happened, luckily for me, was we started putting together Interscope in 1989, the end of 89. That's why I only wound up doing 2 records with Warrant, was because my contract with Interscope was getting ready to start. And I was only allowed to do 1 outside band a year that wasn't on Interscope. So I had plenty of work to do trying to get the label up and running, and we had no artists, so I was traveling quite a bit, trying to look for some artists to put on the roster. So that didn't affect me directly, but it was clear that that my participation in the hair band era created a lot of challenges down the road, even in trying to sign bands for Interscope, because it was like everybody kind of got painted with the same brush. If you had any degree of success during the hair days, the grunge guys were like, no way, I don't even want to talk to you. It was that kind of thing.
It's so ridiculous. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was very, very challenging, that's for sure.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation. You really brought up some cool points, and it's really great to hear some behind-the-scenes stuff from these albums. For people who enjoy your work and have been following you all these years, anything you want to say to them?
Thank you.
Awesome. If somebody wants you to work on their project, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Go to my website, Beau Hill Productions, and then there's links to how they can get to me and they can communicate with me and stuff like that. And I'll actually, it's the same way you found me.
Mm-hmm. Right through the website. Great.
And then I'll get direct contact and follow up on it straight away.
Love all these albums. Love this music. That's all I do is promote it. So this was awesome, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mike, for thinking of me, and I've enjoyed the conversation with you as well. So all the best.
Well, that was a cool one talking with Beau. Hope you enjoyed it. Rock on!